There's this incredibly true story about the character Snuffleupagus from Sesame Street. When that character was originally introduced in the early 1970s, it was as this imaginary friend that only Big Bird could interact with. None of the adults on the show believed that Snuffy was even real, which, when you think about it, is kind of close-minded for a group of people who live on a block with a literal monster in a trash can and a walking, talking 8-foot bird. So I recently watched this documentary called Dear Mr. Watterson, and this is kind of a delving into the history and also the legacy of Calvin and Hobbes. I haven't discussed this in depth before, but I adore Calvin and Hobbes. It is such a precious thing to me, and in my history. This is gonna kind of date myself here a little bit, but when I was a small kid, Calvin and Hobbes was still running in the newspaper, so I got to see that first run, and I eagerly anticipated it. I loved being able to go over to my grandmother's house and grabbing and snatching those newspapers and rifling to the back and being able to read the new Calvin and Hobbes strip. And it was great for a great many reasons. Number one, it definitely helped expand my vocabulary. Albeit some of the words like transmogrify aren't even a word, but there is still this great attention to detail that Bill Watterson gave to his creations. This was not something that talked down to the audience or didn't try and go to the lowest common denominator. They were telling this incredibly engaging, I guess, world building of this comic strip with this small little boy and his pet stuffed tiger. I've always seen Calvin and Hobbes, and this isn't some like groundbreaking interpretation, but I've always seen Calvin and Hobbes as this celebration of children's imagination. So like when you think about this, Calvin is this white middle-class child who kind of is living this mundane, boring life. But in his actual world, he's got this pet tiger, there's space people after him all the time, aliens are invading, his snowmen are rising up and taking on armies of the undead. He's going on these space adventures. Everything around him has been turned into his own playground. His backwoods, his backyard, his room, even just an empty box is something that he can play with and something that he can create something extraordinary out of. And I think there's something still very precious about that. Now, take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt because I really have no numbers to back this up whatsoever. But I remember reading once where imagination leads to better critical thinking because you're not just so intensely focused on what's inside of the box, that problem that you're looking at. You can kind of go outside of it and think of things that no one else would have thought of. And in my own life and in my own childhood, I remember making my mother write down all these stories that were flittering into my brain when I was like, before I was even in school. And I had my own imaginary friend. It was a little flea who would like dance around and lived in that little hole in the wall that I would talk to. And I honestly cannot remember what his name was. But because I was so imaginative with names when I was a kid, I can only imagine I probably called him Flea. And I hope he's doing well. As far as I know, he grew up and became a drummer. That's like the worst dad joke I could think of. I actually just phoned my mom to see if she remembered, and she's blocked my calls. Only half of that sentence is true. Imagination has certainly given us incredible works of art, but it's also given us the ability to go to the moon. It's given us these technological achievements where we can now interact with people halfway across the world. And it's also given us the single best invention of all time, Velcro. Imagination is this weird thing where we only really allow children to revel in it, and at a certain age we make them turn it back in as if there's some cop on the last day on the job. Here's my gun, my badge, my mustache. So if you needed some random guy on the internet to tell you, I'm here to say that I would hold on to that imagination as much as possible because you might just be the person to change the world next. Or it's just going to mean that you're going to be the next person to create something as phenomenal as a young kid and his pet stuffed tiger. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Kyle. I upload videos every Thursday. Every week I also sort of co-host a podcast called Whatever This Is. A link to that and all my social media is down in the description below. What did you read obsessively when you were a kid? Let me know down in the comments below. A place where you can always dream big and will always seem like a figment of my imagination.